The worn, vinyl booth felt like the whole world was spinning, silent save for the late-night whine of the air conditioner, as Ainsley Devereaux's hand closed around something hard, thick, and undeniably expensive, a bespoke alligator leather wallet stuffed with more cash than she'd see in a year. She was just a 23-year-old waitress, juggling student debt and her grandmother's nursing home bills, and she knew the moment she flipped it open, she was holding not just a fortune, but a bomb, a precious secret belonging to the notoriously ruthless tech titan, Thane Alcott. What could possibly be inside this stolen moment of extreme wealth that would bypass the thousands of dollars, the priceless engraved watch, and cause a man who controlled global markets to break down in public? It wasn't the money he missed. It was a single, faded photograph, and the moment Ainsley's kind but weary hand returned it, she unlocked a half-century-old conspiracy of racism, betrayal, and a devastating family secret that connected her own quiet struggle directly to the heart of the Alcott empire. This is the story of Ainsley Devereaux, and how a single act of honesty became the greatest act of revenge. Ainsley Devereaux was 23 years old, and the only thing heavier than her student loan debt was the guilt she carried leaving her beloved grandmother, Elara, in the nursing home every morning. She had the easy grace of an artist, but the calloused hands of a workhorse, splitting her time between painting abstracts and pouring bottomless coffees at the all-night diner, the Low Country Grill, in Charleston, South Carolina. It was around 2 in the morning, the dining room cleared out save for a lone, sleeping businessman slumped in a booth, when the air turned cold with consequence. Ainsley was clearing his table, a mountain of crumpled napkins and forgotten sugar packets, when she saw it. Tucked beneath the pleated cushion was a wallet. This wasn't just any wallet. It was alligator leather, dark as a storm cloud, and custom-made. It felt impossibly thick. Ainsley carried it to the counter, her hands suddenly sweating, and cracked it open just to find contact information. What tumbled out made her gasp, the sound muffled by the humming coffee machine. Wads of crisp, $100 bills, banded tightly, easily totaling more cash than she made in a year. Beneath the currency and black credit cards was a heavy gold watch, the back engraved with initials and what looked like a rare gemstone. The sheer, careless wealth radiating from the object was intoxicating, terrifying, and deeply foreign to her simple life. Before Ainsley could process the enormity of the discovery, her shift manager, Gunnar, shuffled over. Gunnar was a hulking man who specialized in thin-lipped praise and subtle judgments. His eyes narrowed instantly when he saw the stack of cash. Well, Ainsley, that's quite a haul. Bring that right over here. I'll log it for lost and found, he said, his voice flat, his hand outstretched and demanding. His tone implied that a young woman like her couldn't possibly be trusted with such an amount. A sudden surge of defiance, fueled by every slight she had ever endured, stiffened Ainsley's spine. She felt the weight of her grandmother's medical bills like stones in her pockets, and she knew in her soul that the wallet would disappear in Gunnar's hands. "No, sir. I found it. I'll make sure it gets back to the owner," she replied, her voice firm, sliding the expensive wallet into the inner pocket of her apron. The refusal hung in the stale, fluorescent air between them, a small act of rebellion that felt as extreme as robbing a bank. Gunnar's face tightened with disbelief and irritation, but he simply grunted and stalked back to his office. Ainsley felt sick with the secret, questioning her own integrity for the first time. As she hurried to wipe down the counter, a silent television in the corner, usually tuned to sports highlights, flashed an emergency news bulletin. The cheer-in text, bright and alarming, read, "Tech billionaire Thane Alcott's wallet missing. Irreplaceable contents sought. Reward offered." The adrenaline from the confrontation with Gunnar was still coursing through her veins when Ainsley finally left the diner as the pre-dawn light was starting to break. She clutched the precious, cursed object inside her jacket pocket, hurrying down the quiet, cobblestone street, completely absorbed in the scale of the decision she now faced. The $100,000 reward was a life-altering sum, a solution to all her problems, but the shame of even considering it made her stomach twist. That moment of internal torment was violently interrupted when a sleek, black luxury sedan roared around the corner, its tires squealing inches from a curb. Ainsley gasped, stumbling backward against a brick wall as the vehicle corrected itself, the driver not even slowing down. She caught a glimpse of the driver's profile, a young man, arrogant and sharp-featured, looking down at her with a look of pure, dismissive annoyance before speeding off. It was the face of unchecked privilege, a direct contrast to the struggle that defined her own life. The close call shook her, reminding her how little her existence mattered to people in that kind of car, people who probably knew Thane Alcott. Later that morning, safe in the small, cluttered apartment she shared with Sidel, Ainsley found a moment of quiet reflection. It sent her mind back to her grandmother, Alara. When Ainsley was just a child, she remembered Alara working 2 jobs just to keep their tiny home. She recalled one humiliating moment at a grocery store. Alara had been shortchanged by a wealthy woman in line, and when she politely pointed out the error, the woman had smirked and loudly told Alara to learn to count, causing the whole line to stare. Alara, though her eyes were filled with pain, had simply nodded and walked away, later telling Ainsley, "Kindness isn't a gift you give to others, baby girl. It's the one you keep for yourself." Ainsley had internalized that code of quiet, unwavering honesty, and now that code was being tested by an unthinkable amount of money. She pulled the alligator wallet out again, the smooth leather cool against her fingertips. She had to find the contact details. She slid the bank cards aside, then the driver's license confirming the owner was indeed Thane Alcott. But there, nestled in a thin, hidden seam beneath the main card slots, was something else entirely, an old, severely faded photograph. It was a picture of a strikingly beautiful young black woman, perhaps in her early 20s, dressed in clothes from the 1970s. Her eyes held a mixture of fierce intelligence and deep sorrow. The woman looked intensely familiar, almost like a ghost from Ainsley's own family album, but she couldn't place the face. The next evening, the story about the missing wallet went from local news to national obsession. Thane Alcott himself, usually a private and stone-faced figure of commerce, appeared on a primetime news broadcast. He looked visibly aged, his eyes haunted, his composure completely shattered. He didn't speak of the money or the value of the watch. He only spoke of the irreplaceable item he said was in the wallet, begging, almost weeping, for its return. He raised the reward to a staggering $100,000, saying he needed the contents to correct a mistake from 40 years ago. Ainsley watched the interview from the back office of the diner, the walls feeling like they were closing in. The promise of the cash was no longer an abstract idea. It was a screaming siren offering rescue. She knew she could change Alara's life forever. This weight, this agonizing choice, was too much to bear alone. She showed the wallet, the photo, and the news report to her roommate and best friend, Sidel. Sidel, a no-nonsense woman with a survivalist streak, didn't hesitate. She stared at the total value of the contents, the cash, the watch, the reward, and her eyes glazed over with desperation. "Ainsley, look at the life we live. Look at Alara. This isn't greed, it's survival. Call them. Say you found it outside, not in the diner. Tell them you didn't look inside. They'll just give you the money, and we can finally breathe. You owe it to your grandmother to take this chance," Sidel pleaded, her voice rising with an intensity that bordered on accusation. Ainsley listened, the logic of immediate escape fighting a terrible, silent war with the lessons Alara had taught her. She couldn't bring herself to lie, but she also couldn't ignore the possibility that her honesty was just foolish pride. Ainsley returned to the faded photograph, holding it up to the weak desk lamp, trying to ignore Sidel's frustrated pacing. She noticed something faint on the back, a small, stylized symbol that she almost missed. It was a complex, beautiful logo, a flowing, interwoven design of three initial letters that looked like an I, C, and an F. Ainsley instantly recognized the stylized letters, but not the design. It was an early version of the Alcott Foundation logo, the charity Thane Alcott ran. The woman in the photo wasn't just a friend or a lover. She was intrinsically linked to the billion-dollar empire. This discovery changed everything. It transformed the wallet from a simple lost item into a cryptic historical artifact, and Ainsley felt a cold dread that she was holding the key to a true Thane Alcott desperately wanted to hide or desperately needed to recover. The internal pressure reached a breaking point that night. Ainsley sat alone in the living room, the wallet on the table next to her phone. She pulled up the Alcott Foundation's contact page on her laptop. Her finger hovered over the public relations line, the number burning into her retina. The act of calling, of accepting the money, of uttering the planned, simple lie that would erase all their debt, felt like she was about to step off a cliff. She imagined the sterile, corporate voice on the other end, the contracts, the scrutiny, the crushing weight of having compromised her soul for a comfortable future. She saw the relief, but also the permanent shift in her spirit. She physically recoiled, unable to make the call. She knew she couldn't start a new life built on a lie, no matter how small. To steady herself, Ainsley drove to the nursing home for an unscheduled visit with Alara. Her grandmother was mostly quiet these days, drifting between brief periods of lucidity and long stretches of quiet confusion. Ainsley just wanted to hold her hand and be reminded of the simple, true north of their morality. As Ainsley was smoothing her grandmother's blanket, Alara woke up, her eyes clear and focused for the first time in weeks. Alara squeezed Ainsley's hand, her voice a reedy whisper. She didn't talk about the present, but the past. They were cruel, Ainsley, Alara murmured, her gaze distant, fixed on a place Ainsley couldn't see. They tried to tear things apart, but I made a promise. I swore I'd protect it, even when the world tried to make me forget. Her hand then tightened its grip. Promise me you'll always choose the harder path, Ainsley. That's the path that leads you home. The clarity in her voice was so profound, so specific to Ainsley's current struggle, that it felt like divine intervention. The fear of being a fool for not taking the money vanished, replaced by a fierce determination to honor her family's true legacy. Ainsley left the nursing home with a new plan. No lawyers, no reward, and no public statement. She would return the wallet and the irreplaceable item directly to Thane Alcott. She found an old, faded business card stuck deep inside a tiny flap of the wallet. It was Thane Alcott's personal cell number, written in elegant script. Instead of calling, she sent a single, heavily coded text message designed to bypass his security and alert him personally. Lenore's twin has the foundational promise. Tonight, public garden at dusk. No suits, no cameras. Come alone. It was a massive, dangerous gamble. She was putting herself in the path of a desperate billionaire's emotional turmoil and the possibility of a trap. But it was the only way to return the item with her conscience intact. Ainsley arrived at the secluded, central fountain in the public garden just as the last rays of sunlight were fading. The tension was suffocating. She wore a simple dark jacket and jeans, feeling hopelessly exposed in the echoing silence of the park. She stood there, clutching the wallet in her hand, watching every figure that approached. She expected to see Thane Alcott, an old man, alone and desperate, but the meeting she had carefully orchestrated immediately went sideways. A black SUV, the same model that had nearly hit her the day before, glided silently to the curb 40 feet away. Out stepped Dax Alcott, Thane's entitled and dismissive son, flanked by two immense men in expensive, tailored suits who looked less like bodyguards and more like enforcers. Dax approached Ainsley with an air of absolute superiority, a sneer already fixed on his face. "You must be the girl," he said, his voice flat with contempt. Listen, my father is too old and too sentimental for this kind of foolishness. Hand over the wallet now. We can discuss a reasonable finder's fee, but don't try to extort us. We already know who you are and where you work. The shift in power was immediate and aggressive. Ainsley felt the heat of injustice rise in her chest, but she stood her ground, using the same quiet authority her grandmother had taught her. I'm not here for a fee, and I'm certainly not here to talk to his son, she countered, her voice low and steady. The note I sent was clear. My promise was to the owner, Thane Alcott, face to face. I have something irreplaceable that you obviously don't understand the value of. Dax leaned closer, his eyes cold. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. Oh, I understand. You're trying to profit off my father's senility. Give me the wallet now, or I'll call the police myself and tell them you stole it from the grill. Just as Dax reached out, his fingers brushing the fabric of her jacket, a black town car appeared on the opposite side of the fountain. The door opened, and a man emerged. Not the corporate shark she expected, but a desperate, elderly figure moving with frantic energy. It was Thane Alcott. He sprinted across the cobblestone toward them, pushing his son, Dax, roughly out of the way. Thane ignored the bodyguards and the protests of his son, his attention singularly focused on Ainsley. His frantic eyes swept over her face, her high cheekbones, the slight curve of her jaw, and the desperation instantly evaporated, replaced by a profound, agonizing familiarity that seemed to suck the air right out of the public garden. Thane Alcott stared at the young waitress, his lips parting in stunned silence. If you're loving this story so far, smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. The moment the older man pushed his son, Dax, aside and his eyes met Ainsley's, the air changed. That desperation she had seen on television was gone, replaced by a devastating, raw familiarity that made her skin prickle. He didn't look like a billionaire CEO. He looked like a ghost. She finally held out the alligator wallet, her own hand shaking slightly now. Thane Alcott took it from her, his fingers brushing hers, and the electric jolt of their contact was shocking. He didn't pause to thank her, didn't glance at the wads of cash inside, and he certainly ignored the priceless watch. His focus was singular, agonizing. He immediately reached for the small, inner compartment in the fold of the leather where Ainsley had found the photograph. He pulled the fold open. His shoulders immediately slumped. The compartment was empty, save for the faint imprint of the paper that had been resting there for decades. Thane looked up at Ainsley, his face a mask of crushing disappointment. He didn't accuse her. He just looked broken. The photograph, he whispered, his voice thin with exhaustion. It's the only thing that matters. Ainsley's heart ached for him. She had kept the photo, not out of malice, but because she hadn't known how important it was yet. She quickly pulled the faded picture from her jacket pocket and handed it back to him. I didn't take the money, Mr. Alcott. I just saw this. It looked important, she explained, holding his gaze. She was beautiful, and there's an old logo on the back of it, like an older version of your foundation symbol. She seemed connected to you somehow. Her words, intended to provide context, hit him like a physical blow. Thane took the photograph, staring down at the young woman's face, then back up at Ainsley, his eyes blurring with sudden, unstoppable tears. The sight of the powerful, famously ruthless man weeping was an extreme emotional event that silenced the world around them. It was not a quiet sorrow, but a deep, ragged grief that shook his entire body. Dax and the bodyguards froze, horrified by this unprecedented display of weakness. Thane held the photo and simply burst into tears, the sound raw and painful. He stumbled back a step, covering his mouth with his free hand, forcing himself to breathe. He looked at Ainsley one last time, his voice a choked whisper, letting go of the name he had clearly carried in silent agony for decades. Lenore. The secret locked behind the name, Lenore was finally beginning to unravel, tearing down the wall between Ainsley's simple life and the Alcott empire. The air, thick with Thane's raw, unexpected grief, demanded an answer. Who was she? Ainsley asked quietly. Thane wiped his eyes roughly, the CEO facade reassembling slightly, though still fractured. He confirmed Lenore was more than important. She was his first love, the only woman who ever truly understood him, a brilliant, fierce young black woman who was a pivotal civil rights activist in Charleston in the 1970s. Thane explained that the photograph was the last physical memory he had of her. The watch, the money, none of it mattered. It was Lenore's face, her story. That was the priceless item he had been desperate to recover. He painted a picture of a time when their love was utterly forbidden. Thane was a young scion of a powerful, old money, and deeply prejudiced Southern family. Lenore was a revolutionary. Their bond was a lightning rod for his parents' disapproval and, eventually, their active sabotage. They were from two separate worlds, and the older Alcotts had been determined to keep them apart. Thane detailed the sheer vision Lenore had. She wasn't just protesting injustice. She was building something. She had the original blueprint for a vast charitable organization dedicated to lifting up marginalized communities, the very concept that eventually became the Alcott Foundation. The logo Ainsley saw on the back of the photo was Lenore's original hand-sketch design. Thane confessed that when Lenore suddenly disappeared, he had taken her idea, driven by a mix of genuine desire to honor her dream and a cynical need to prove his worth to his father. The foundation's success was built on Lenore's genius, a truth he had lived with, but never admitted. Ainsley, completely absorbed by this tale of star-crossed love and foundational betrayal, could only think of her grandmother, Elara, and her strange warning about promises. Then, Thane asked the question that made the ground beneath Ainsley's feet crumble. You mentioned your family. Your grandmother. What was her name? Ainsley told him, quietly and clearly, Elara Devereux. Thane Alcott's entire body went rigid. The color drained from his face until he looked ghostly pale. He didn't move, didn't blink. Then, with a voice full of dawning, terrifying realization, he whispered the words that changed Ainsley's life forever. Elara was Lenore's twin sister. The shock of the twin revelation was profound, an extreme emotional wave that silenced the chaos of the evening. Ainsley's mind reeled. Two sisters, one lost to the history books, one living silently in a nursing home. The familiarity she saw in the photograph, the way the woman looked like a long-lost aunt, suddenly made chilling sense. Thane confirmed the impossible truth. Elara was Lenore's mirror image, her anchor, her only confidant. The terror in Elara's eyes when she spoke of the Alcotts was instantly justified. Thane confessed the deepest shame of his life. Lenore hadn't simply left town, she was driven out. His father, a man obsessed with protecting the family's racial purity and legacy, had initiated a campaign of harassment and threats against Lenore and, by extension, Elara. He made it clear that if Lenore didn't disappear, both she and her sister would face ruin or worse. Lenore made the ultimate sacrifice and vanished, protecting her twin and their family from the toxic power of the Alcotts. Thane had been too young and too weak to stop his father, a failure that had haunted his success ever since. He explained how he had appropriated Lenore's dream, the foundation. He used her vision to build his empire, a constant, subtle act of self-torture. He kept the wallet, not for the money, but for Lenore's picture and a specific, folded piece of paper. This was the irreplaceable item. He revealed that just before Lenore disappeared, she sent him a frantic, coded letter setting up a secret meeting. In that letter, she mentioned she was going to give him something important, something that would ensure her legacy would live on. It was a final, hopeful gesture of trust. Thane never made it to that meeting. His father ensured he was detained far from Charleston on a fabricated business emergency. When he returned, Lenore was gone, and the wallet was all he had left a painful reminder of his cowardice. Now, the wallet was back, but the old, folded letter detailing the secret meeting was missing. It was the only proof of his father's manipulation and the only clue to what Lenore wanted to give him. He searched the compartment frantically, running his hands over the expensive leather. It was completely, devastatingly gone. Fane's despair over the missing letter was palpable, a whole opening in the center of their tense group. The priceless picture was recovered, but the paper trail that could finally exonerate him and expose his family's dark history was lost. Dax Alcott, who had been watching his father's breakdown in stunned silence, suddenly straightened. He cut into the conversation, his eyes darting nervously toward his father's car, as if checking for surveillance. He didn't speak the full truth, but the implication was heavy and sharp. "Dad, maybe you just forgot where you put the letter," Dax said, his tone too forced, too casual. "Maybe you missed the meeting, but the part about Dad's father keeping you busy, maybe that's not exactly how it happened. You need to be sure about what you're accusing people of." The subtle, chilling deflection was an extreme event in itself. It was the sound of a son protecting a deeper, current family lie. Ainsley watched the exchange, her mind racing, suddenly seeing the bigger, darker picture. She realized Dax's entire behavior since she found the wallet was calculated. The reckless driving that nearly hit her? It wasn't a random accident. It was him staking out the diner's neighborhood, try to find the missing wallet before his father realized it was gone. He hadn't been worried about her. He was worried about the contents falling into the wrong hands, his father's hands. He was following his father, protecting his mother's interests in the family war. He was searching for the letter, but not to give it to Thane. He wanted to destroy it. The realization hit Ainsley with crushing force. The betrayal that ruined Thane's life was now threatening to ruin her own. But just as Ainsley was about to confront Dax with her realization, Thane's phone let out a single, piercing, anonymous notification. He picked it up, his face paling as he read the message. It was a link and a title that sent a jolt of icy fear through them all. The message read, "Alcott Family Secret, the Foundational Lie. Exclusive historical document auction begins now." The missing letter was not destroyed, but weaponized. The dark web auction link shattered the uneasy peace of the garden. The immediate, extreme threat of their family history being publicly exposed and monetized forced a sudden, frantic alliance. Thane Alcott, now galvanized by panic and rage, grabbed Dax by the arm. "Get in the car. We're going to the archives. We need to find the truth before that letter destroys us all." Dax, completely terrified of the scale of the impending scandal that would implicate his mother, finally cooperated. Ainsley, now an undeniable part of the Alcott crisis, was pulled along. The drive to the Alcott headquarters was a high-speed, silent nightmare. The conflict between Thane and Ainsley shifted during this tense journey. They spoke not as a billionaire and a waitress, but as two people bound by the memory of Lenore. Thane confessed that the $100,000 reward was never about retrieving the cash. It was about getting the letter back silently, protecting Lenore's dignity, and preventing the world from seeing his family's corruption. He was genuinely trying, at this late hour, to honor the woman he failed. Ainsley saw past the CEO and saw the heartbroken man, realizing her own initial impulse to return the wallet had been the only truly right choice. They arrived at the heavily fortified Alcott Archives, a massive, silent building that felt like a tomb of secrets. Thane bypassed security using a deep-level code, leading Ainsley and a visibly shaking Dax into a massive, climate control vault. There were rows of documents detailing decades of Alcott business and family history. They worked against the ticking clock of the online auction, desperately searching for any counter-evidence, any other documentation related to Lenore or the meeting. After an hour of frantic searching, Ainsley noticed a strange, custom indentation on an antique desk that belonged to Thane's deceased, manipulative father. She pressed it, and a hidden drawer slid open. Inside, lay an old, heavy leather-bound journal. The pages were covered in Thane's father's precise, hateful script, but it was all written in an intense, cryptic code. It was a diary of corruption and control. Ainsley flipped to the back pages, where a final, terrifying entry stood out, confirming his role in driving Lenore away and mentioning a final item he had hidden away to secure the Alcott name and legacy forever. But what that item was remained a complete mystery. If you're loving this story so far, share this video with someone that needs to watch this video. The cryptic journal entry haunted Ainsley. Before she could process the idea of a final item hidden by Thane's cruel father, her first priority was checking on the one person who carried the living memory of this 7-year-old betrayal, her grandmother, Elara. Ainsley drove straight to the nursing home, the weight of the Lenore secret pressing down on her. She had to know how much Elara remembered and if the old woman was in any danger. When Ainsley arrived, Elara was awake, but her usual gentle demeanor was replaced by a visible, bone-deep terror. "You mustn't go near them, Ainsley. You mustn't talk to that man," Elara whispered urgently, clutching Ainsley's hand with unexpected strength. "The Alcotts, they take everything. They took Lenore. They threaten me into silence. They make promises, but they only want control." Elara's eyes darted nervously, as if the walls themselves had ears. In a moment of intense lucidity, Elara shared a heartbreaking confession, a belief she had harbored for decades. She didn't just believe Thane's father drove Lenore away. She believed Thane himself had eventually betrayed Lenore, selling out their love for the sake of his fortune and his family name. The idea that Thane might still be complicit, that his current distress was just an act of damage control, struck Ainsley with icy doubt. Her grandmother's fear was potent and real. But before Ainsley could truly process this deep-seated familial distrust, a sleek, expensive town car pulled up outside the nursing home window. A meticulously dressed lawyer, who looked as stiff and cold as the air conditioning, entered Elara's room. He introduced himself formally, stating he represented the Alcott estate. The lawyer was calm, professional, and utterly chilling. He placed a thick folder on Elara's bedside table, already open to a sign page. It was an offer of a massive, life-changing financial settlement, a payout large enough to buy the entire nursing home. The condition was simple, written in polite, legal jargon. Elara must sign a non-disclosure agreement ensuring absolute, permanent silence regarding any historical connections to the Alcott family. It was a thinly veiled, outrageous offer of hush money, proving the Alcotts knew everything and were moving fast to bury the past. And it was the most extreme, blatant attempt at control Ainsley had ever witnessed. The lawyer's arrival and the cold financial offer ignited a fierce protectiveness in Ainsley. She slammed the folder shut, rejecting the settlement outright. "You can tell the Alcott estate that Ms. Devereux isn't for sale," she stated, her voice tight with suppressed rage, dismissing the lawyer before he could utter another threat. She knew that signing that paper would be a final betrayal of Lenore and everything Elara had sacrificed. She decided that the only way to protect her grandmother was to find the truth hidden in that encrypted journal. Ainsley returned to the Alcott headquarters and, with a now subdued but willing Thane and Dax, began the painstaking process of decrypting Thane's father's coded entries. They worked for hours, Ainsley's artistic eye often spotting the patterned repetitions in the old man's script that Thane's technological approach missed. The code was complex, a mixture of financial ledgers and personal diary entries, and it spoke of immense cruelty. They finally broke through one section that definitively confirmed his involvement in Lenore's disappearance, ending with the chilling note about the final item. The entry indicated the final item was hidden in plain sight, protected by the person the old man trusted least. They realized it was a cruel, poetic revenge. The item was hidden within a life-size, Baroque-style portrait of Thane's mother, a woman Thane himself openly despised for her unwavering, toxic racism, and her role in tormenting Lenore. It was a vicious irony. The truth about the family's greatest shame was hidden inside the image of the person who most upheld that shame. As they carefully, gingerly lifted the massive portrait from the wall of the ancestral library, Ainsley and Thane shared a rare, quiet moment of genuine connection. They weren't fighting over money or reputation. They were fighting against the generational sins of a privileged, prejudiced family. Thane spoke briefly of the sorrow of disappointing his father, even when he knew his father was wrong. Ainsley spoke of the burden of carrying a family legacy of poverty and resilience. They were united by the emotional cost of their ancestry. Beneath the painting, they found a small, almost invisible compartment built into the wall itself. Ainsley reached in, her fingers closing around a thick legal document. The document in Ainsley's hand wasn't a will or a stock certificate or anything about the foundation. It was a pristine, official birth certificate. The name on the document was listed as Lenore Alcott. The date of birth was 2 years after Lenore had supposedly vanished from Charleston. The paper felt like a lead weight, confirming the immediate, extreme event they had feared. Lenore was pregnant when she left. She hadn't just disappeared. She had gone into hiding to have a child, Thane's child, and she had used her own name to ensure the child had some connection to his father, even as she protected him from the Alcott family. The revelation was shocking, but the child's name listed on the certificate was deceptively ordinary, Elias. Thane stumbled back, dropping into a nearby leather chair, his face buried in his hands. 50 years of life, and he had a son he never knew existed, a life stolen by his own father's cold, racist machinations. The child would now be middle-aged, out there somewhere, completely unaware of his true lineage or his billionaire father. Ainsley stood there, the reality of the situation sinking in. This portrait, this grotesque centerpiece of the family's pride, was a cruel, passive-aggressive monument to Thane's failed life, a constant reminder to him of the son he lost and the woman he couldn't save. It was an act of pure, distilled revenge by the deceased patriarch. Ainsley felt a deep empathy for Thane's sudden, raw grief over the lost years with his son. Thane finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his movements frantic. He grabbed the birth certificate and began rapidly searching his private global database. He was looking for any record of an Elias Alcott of the correct age, a long-lost son. The search came up empty. He tried different combinations, different last names. His fingers hovered over the screen, inputting the name of Ainsley's family, Devereux. Then he saw it. In the Social Security Index, a single definitive name appeared, matching the birth date perfectly. A man who died several years ago, but whose record was linked to Elara Devereux, Elias Devereux, Elara's deceased husband. The confirmation was instantaneous and devastating. Elias Devereux was the son of Lenore Alcott and Thane Alcott. This meant Ainsley's deceased father was Thane's long-lost son. The extreme magnitude of this truth hit Ainsley first as absolute denial, then as a blinding clarity. The pieces of the puzzle, Elara's intense secrecy, the visual resemblance, the shared name Devereux, slammed together. Ainsley, now overwhelmed, confronted her grandmother at the nursing home, placing the birth certificate directly on Elara's frail lap. Elara's composure completely shattered. She began to weep, tears streaming down her aged face as she nodded slowly. The long-held secret, the decades of fear and isolation, poured out of her in a broken confession. Lenore, in hiding, had given birth to the baby, named Elias, and died tragically shortly after childbirth due to complications. Before she died, Lenore entrusted her twin sister, Elara, with the infant. Lenore made Elara promise to raise him as her own, to give him a simple life, a life safe from the toxic, prejudiced, manipulative power of the Alcott dynasty. Alara confessed to raising Elias as her own son, giving him her husband's last name to shield him. She kept the truth buried, fearing that if the Alcotts ever found out, they would take the child away, just as they had taken Lenore. This act of profound, protective love was also a lifetime of painful, isolating secrecy. It was a staggering sacrifice that had defined both her and Ainsley's lives. But the final, most extreme revelation lay waiting, unspoken, until Ainsley forced herself to ask. She looked at the birth certificate, then at her grandmother, then at the photo of Lenore, and finally whispered the inevitable question: if Elias was Lenore's son, and you raised him, and Elias was my father. Alara closed her eyes, letting out a final, agonizing sob. She simply nodded. Elias Devereux was Ainsley's father, making Thane Alcott her biological grandfather. The emotional fallout was explosive. Ainsley was reeling. The waitress from the Low Country Grill was suddenly the biological granddaughter of a tech billionaire, the heiress to an empire built on the stolen dream of her great-aunt. The world felt impossibly distorted. The shock quickly transitioned into a furious sense of identity crisis, fueled by the realization that her life of quiet struggle had been completely unnecessary, a byproduct of a racist conspiracy. Just moments after the confession, Thane Alcott burst into the nursing home room, having tracked Ainsley down. He rushed to Alara's side, not as a CEO, but as the boy who loved Lenore. The reunion between the two old souls, the grieving billionaire and the protective twin, was devastating. They spoke softly, crying over the half-century of lost time, lost love, and the son they both loved and lost. It was a moment of profound, shared sorrow and regret, a heavy, yet less extreme emotional beat compared to the initial shock. They were finally, tragically, family. This quiet, fragile family moment was abruptly destroyed by an extreme violation. Dax Alcott, who had followed his father and watched the entire scene from the hallway, was filming them on his phone. The truth that his father had a legitimate black heir would destroy his own future inheritance and his mother's standing. Horrified, he attempted to flee the nursing home with the evidence, running down the hall toward the exit. Ainsley, propelled by a sudden, protective surge of rage for the pain inflicted on her grandmother, leaped out of the room. She was no longer just the waitress. She was the granddaughter protecting her legacy. She intercepted Dax, cutting off his escape route near the elevator. The struggle was immediate, physical, and desperate. Dax wrestled to protect his phone, but Ainsley, fueled by the accumulated injustice of 50 years of family lies, grabbed his arm with surprising strength, demanding he drop the evidence of his betrayal. If you're loving this story so far, smash that like button and let us know with a fire emoji in the comments. The struggle between Ainsley and Dax in the sterile hallway of the nursing home was a desperate climax of decades of family toxicity. Ainsley, usually quiet and reserved, was now fueled by a lifetime of systemic injustice and the immediate desire to protect her grandmother's story. She wasn't fighting Dax for money. She was fighting for the truth of her ancestry. She gripped his arm, twisting it with raw adrenaline, forcing the phone, the evidence, to clatter onto the tiled floor. "You took the letter from the wallet, didn't you?" Ainsley demanded, breathing hard. "You knew what it was, and you stole it to destroy Lenore's history." Dax, defeated and trembling, finally broke. He wasn't the ruthless villain. He was a desperate, entitled son trying to please a vicious parent. He admitted the whole truth, confirming Ainsley's suspicions. He confessed he had taken the letter to prove his father was unstable, trying to force an early inheritance because he was scared of losing his birthright to some charity project. In a tearful, hurried admission, Dax revealed that the true puppet master was his mother, Thane's current wife, Estelle Alcott. She was the one who was pushing the divorce and the attempt to dismantle Thane's legacy. She was behind the ruthless corporate takeover of the foundation, purging Lenore's original, radical vision, and transforming it into a self-serving vanity project for the Alcott name. Dax was just a pawn. This less extreme event of familial breakdown was a bitter moment of understanding for Ainsley, realizing the evil they fought wasn't just old racism, but the modern, corporate greed that sought to erase it. But the danger wasn't over. Just as Thane reached them, his face pale with horror over his son's confession, a new figure swept into the hallway. It was Estelle Alcott, Thane's current wife. She was impeccable, glacial, and flanked by 2 local police officers. She walked with the cold authority of someone who always got her way, her eyes burning with calculated fury. "There she is, officer," Estelle announced, her voice ringing with false distress. "That woman is Ainsley Devereux. She stole my husband's property, and she's trying to extort him with ludicrous claims about a dead relative. Arrest her immediately." The sight of Ainsley being publicly detained by the police was a gut-wrenching, extreme event. Estelle Alcott stood back, the picture of aggrieved victimhood, using her power and privilege to weaponize the system against Ainsley. In front of the handful of onlookers and the nursing home staff, Estelle began her calculated performance, using coded language to paint Ainsley as a desperate, thieving opportunist. She spoke of people like this and the lack of respect for law and order, painting Ainsley's kindness as cunning deceit. Ainsley stood tall, refusing to flinch, maintaining eye contact with the police officer, even as the handcuffs felt impossibly cold on her wrists. The humiliation was crushing, a raw reminder of every unjust moment in her life. This moment of public assault on her character was necessary for Thane's redemption. Seeing Ainsley treated this way, forced into silence by his own wife's cruelty, finally shattered the last vestiges of his old life. Thane Alcott pushed past his terrified son and stood directly between Estelle and Ainsley. He reached into his jacket pocket, not for a weapon, but for the truth, the precious birth certificate he had recovered. His voice, usually quiet and defeated, was now loud and clear, echoing through the hallway. "Stop this now. You will not touch her. She is not a thief. She is my granddaughter, and she is the last living link to the love you tried to destroy 50 years ago." He shoved the birth certificate into the officer's hand, declaring Ainsley his heir. The public scene exploded into chaos. Estelle shrieked. The officers looked confused, and the small crowd gasped. The weight of a billionaire's sudden, public admission was enough to halt the arrest. The police, facing a massive family scandal, were forced to release Ainsley immediately. As the officers stepped away, Estelle's eyes narrowed into slits of venomous hatred. She looked directly at Thane, ignoring Ainsley completely, and whispered a chilling promise. "The foundation is mine now, and Lenore's dream dies tonight." Estelle's threat was an extreme event, a corporate execution of Lenore's legacy. Back at the Alcott headquarters, Thane frantically logged into the Foundation's internal systems, his hands trembling. He confirmed the worst. Estelle had systematically used her position on the board to scrub all records of Lenore Alcott's original concept. The Foundation's new mission had been altered to fund only elite, safe, politically palatable projects, effectively destroying the radical, community-focused vision Lenore had created. The Foundation, which was supposed to be Lenore's enduring triumph, was now Estelle's ultimate tool of prejudice and ego. It was a heartbreaking moment of loss, knowing Lenore's dream had survived his father's direct threats only to be corrupted by his wife's corporate maneuvering. But amidst the wreckage, Ainsley found a surprising strength. The emotional weight of the truth settled on her, not as a burden, but as an awakening. She looked at the remnants of Lenore's original plans, the bold color palettes, the abstract designs, the passionate, handwritten mission statements, and realized where her own quiet artistic talent came from. She wasn't just related to Lenore. She was her mirror image, her artistic and spiritual successor. She felt an empowering, undeniable connection to the great aunt she never met, realizing her path wasn't about surviving, but about fulfilling a destiny. Thane, watching Ainsley's transformation, apologized again for his lifelong cowardice. But Ainsley cut him off, focusing on the future. They returned to the documents Alara had given them decades ago. Tucked into an old, faded envelope labeled Elias's Future was a reference to a forgotten account at a small community bank, a secret savings account Lenore had opened under her son's name just before she died. It contained almost no money, but one reference led to another, finally revealing the final item that Thane's father had mentioned, a digital archive. The discovery of the digital archive was the final, high-stakes piece of the puzzle. It wasn't money, it was evidence. Lenore's true blueprint for the Foundation, her passionate vision, and, most importantly, her final will and testament were locked within that encrypted digital box. Ainsley, armed with the birth certificate and the archival data, was now the legal co-heir and the rightful face of Lenore's legacy. The battle moved from the hallway to the boardroom. The next morning, in the Foundation's marble-clad boardroom, Ainsley and Thane walked in together. Estelle, already sitting at the head of the long table, sneered, surrounded by her hand-picked board members. Ainsley, dressed simply but radiating a quiet authority that transcended wealth, laid the birth certificate and the archived documents on the table. She looked directly at Estelle and, using the power of the truth, demanded her immediate resignation. Estelle fought back fiercely, attempting a final, extreme act of malice. She threatened to release a professionally doctored video that twisted Alara's confession, painting the elderly woman as a bitter, opportunistic thief who stole Lenore's baby for money. It was a vile attempt to use Ainsley's love for her grandmother as a weakness. Ainsley paused, taking a deep, steadying breath. Then, she simply shook her head and placed a thumb drive into the boardroom's presentation system. The screen flickered to life, showing the faded, beautiful face of Lenore Alcott herself. It was Lenore's final video message, recorded just before she went into hiding. Her voice, decades old but full of passion, began a tearful speech about hope, justice, and community. She spoke of her love for Thane, revealing that she forgave him, knowing he was good and would one day do the right thing to honor her memory. Then came the final, crushing blow for Estelle. Lenore detailed the racist, predatory origins of the original Alcott fortune, exposing the moral rot that Estelle had sought to protect. Estelle was defeated, her entire life built on deception finally exposed by a ghost from the past. The immediate aftermath was swift and total. Estelle Alcott was ruined, legally forced out of the Foundation, and facing a massive divorce settlement. Dax, repenting, used his position to help Thane and Ainsley secure the Foundation's complete restructure. Thane, finally free of his father's ghost and his toxic marriage, embraced Ainsley, confirming they were true family at last, bound by blood, sorrow, and a shared mission. Months later, the world was a different place. Ainsley Alcott Devereux sat in a modest, sunlit office, now overseeing the newly rebranded Lenore Foundation for Community Resilience. She had used the Foundation's resources to move her grandmother, Alara, home, where she was surrounded by love and peace, finally free of the Alcott shadow. Thane had officially retired, dedicating his final years to mentoring Ainsley, watching Lenore's dream finally bloom under his granddaughter's guidance. The story was one of ultimate redemption and hope, not just revenge. Ainsley finished reviewing a grant proposal, the sun warm on her face. She picked up the old alligator wallet, now kept as a treasured keepsake on her desk. She ran her fingers over the smooth, worn leather, opening the small compartment where the photo and the stolen letter had once been. It was not empty. Thane had silently replaced the lost artifacts with a final, profound item, a beautifully engraved pension fund statement. The recipient? Gunner, her old, prejudiced manager from the Low Country Grill. Thane, seeing the opportunity to correct a wrong, even against someone who showed Ainsley casual disrespect, had quietly gifted the man the financial stability he was too proud to ask for, without ever taking credit. Ainsley looked down at the paper, a genuine smile breaking through her tears. The revenge she could have taken against the small-minded people in her past was nothing compared to the powerful kindness she could now offer. It was the ultimate poetic justice. The final shot is Ainsley closing the wallet, the screen text appearing. Sometimes the greatest revenge is choosing to be the kindness you never received. What would you have done with the wallet? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, true stories.